Hello, welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie, and yeah, today I'm gonna do a wrap up of my March reads. I feel like spring is here. Yeah, honestly, March was a pretty weird reading month for me, and just like weird in the it was just like weird. I feel like at the beginning I felt like I was going very, very slowly, and then at the end I realised I've read like 9 books or something this month, which is obviously quite a lot. Hard to know how much I want to like talk about this in like more of the like intricate details, but I guess like obviously I'm chronically ill, I talk about that a lot, but what I do feel like is recently I have been able to notice that I have slightly more energy than I've had before, and that slight increase doesn't really change my like how I can live my life in any particularly like major or like intense way, but it is, I mean, it's great to have slightly more energy, you know, even if it's like a 5% increase, that's great. Anyway, so I guess I'm trying to kind of get used to that and to try to figure out how to not then push myself, because I'm like, oh, I have energy for this thing, but actually like maybe I should still make fairly considered and like careful decisions about that kind of thing, so that I don't push myself and then become extremely burnt out, which definitely I think could happen, especially when you're not used to having slightly more capacity. Whatever, I'm getting into the weeds of this a bit. So the point is that maybe that was partially to do with this month, where I was finally kind of realising that maybe I had a bit more energy, and then so I was like focusing on slightly other things, but then I still managed to read quite a lot, so I don't know. And obviously I do get to a point where like cognitively I can't really read if I'm really fatigued, but I do also love reading a lot, so but I also, you know, like when I can't leave my house, or like I, you know, mostly am by myself and I am like hanging out by myself, I do a lot of reading. That's one of the reasons why I read quite a lot. Like obviously other people read more, blah blah blah, but just like the time that I put into reading as opposed to necessarily the number of books I read, like it's a lot, and that's partially because I spend a lot of my time indoors, sometimes in my bed, or just like it's not like I can leave my flat, like I'm here. Because I'm too tired to do anything else or whatever. Anyway, really long preamble. I'm so sorry. Okay, so the first book I read was a reread, and that's The Magicians of Caprona by Diana Wynne Jones. I thought this was just as charming. I loved it. This is a book in the Chrestomanci series, but Chrestomanci is only like a vague character who comes in kind of near the end, and it's like a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, except from the focus is not really on the like romance, it's on the two brothers who are in this family. So it's the Patroclus versus the Montanas. It's set in Caprona, hence Magicians of Caprona, and they're these two magical families, and they're obviously like at war with each other. Yeah, it's just really fun, and I remember when I first read this, it was like one of the first Chrestomanci series books that I actually really enjoyed. So when I reread it, I was just also really enjoying it still, and remembering that. But I love like the world building in this. It's set in an Italy that is not unified. It's like an alternative universe kind of thing with the magic as well. It's just really great. It's really enjoyable. I 100% recommend it. Great children's book. Okay, this is clearly going to be a rambling one, but like on the topic of children's books, Katie Flowers just made a really lovely video about like reading what I guess like people call middle grade. I really dislike, like we don't, that's not a thing in the UK, or like in the sense of a school framework, like it, so I really don't like, but anyway, it's about reading middle grade or like kids books, and like why people should read kids books, and like not just children but also adults. So I'm gonna link that in the description box because I really liked it, and at the beginning she talks about this essay that like Catherine Rundle wrote about why people should read kids books, and like all people should, and it's also really lovely. It actually made me cry, but like that's maybe just me. Okay, so the next thing I read was Several People Are Typing by Calvin Kasulke, which I actually did talk about in my trans book recommendations video, because Calvin Kasulke is trans. Forgot the word for trans there for a second. I think like he described himself as like a tall transsexual on the like bio that I looked up of him, but anyway. Yeah, so this is a very slight novel because it's all Slack messages about Gerald. That's right, yeah, Gerald, who has his consciousness uploaded onto Slack, and people think it's like a bit at his PR office job, but it's not, it's real. And it's like about his relationships, that, and also like like office culture online, and it's like an absurdist kind of capitalist comedy type thing sort of, and yeah, it's just like, it's also very sweet. It's like queer as well, and like, yeah, cute. I gave it 4 stars, but in retrospect I think it's more like 3.5 just because it's quite slight. But I read it like I think almost all in one go. The next book that I read was Poor Things by Alistair Gray, which I don't have with me, but I did make a 30-minute video talking about it in terms of the film and the book and comparing the two. So I won't talk about it very much here, just to say that I did really enjoy the book. I'm glad that I read it. I am interested in reading Lanark, even if I have heard that it's misogynistic. I think it's a really enjoyable book in terms of like the novel form and really playing around with the dimensions of what a novel can do and what a novel says it's doing versus what it actually can do, which is lie and or tell the truth. It's also actually interesting that I read this in the month that I finished The Golden Notebook as well, which I'll talk about soon too. But anyway, they're very different books obviously, but they are both interested in novels and form. And also politics. Anyway, let's not get distracted. So yeah, anyway, I'll leave the link to that video. And you know, obviously I do talk about the book in comparison with the film, but you can get more of a sense of like what I thought about the book in that video as well. Okay, so now we're getting on to some Natalia Ginzburg reading. So I read Valentino, which is it's a short story. Even though it's published separately, like this book is like 62 pages. And this, I didn't really enjoy. I feel like a lot of the Natalia Ginzburg I've been reading I haven't really enjoyed, but I have been finding it interesting, and I really like Natalia Ginzburg as an author, a writer. And it's not that I'm like, I would say also my unenjoyment isn't the same thing as saying that they don't have like merit or that they aren't kind of like interesting to talk about or think about, and some of them I have liked more than others. I think also after a while, like, there is a bit of a sameness to, especially the beginnings of her novels. I feel like they all start in quite a similar way, often about like a family. They often describe either like a mother-daughter relationship or a just like family setup, like my cousins were this, or like we had this guy who lived with us when he was 19 and he was a distant cousin. He was a distant vampire. But Valentino is interesting in terms of like queer representation. There is like queerness inside of it. It's from the 1950s, I want to say. So it's post-war, you know, but obviously still dealing with the aftermath of like fascism and World War II. I think it's trying to do something, and it's not necessarily that successful in terms of questioning gender norms or like representing gender non-conformity in a positive way. It definitely, I wouldn't say does that, but it's not, you know, horrible or like really, really homophobic or anything. It is quite tragic though. But yeah, so interesting to read, but not enjoyable. That's kind of how I have been feeling like about most of her books, although maybe The Dry Heart I found the least interesting too. But anyway, I am gonna make a video, I think, when I talk about all of the Natalia Ginzburg books that I've read this year, because I've read quite a few now, and also I'm going to keep reading some of them. I think I've got a couple left to read, which I do think I am going to read. I've also been undecided about whether I'm going to like keep reading with this like reading group that I'm kind of reading it with, and I have decided like I am kind of, or like I have sort of been. I kind of took a break and I gave myself permission not to, and then I realised I wanted to, or at least like I thought the novel was interesting, so I did. But I haven't read one of them, and another one actually I'll talk about. The next book I read was a book that was in my New York book haul, but actually I didn't get in New York, it was just like a present. And this is a a graphic novel retelling of the Book of Genesis. It's called Let There Be Light, the real story of her creation by Liana Fink. It's a very funny, sweet book. I actually did cry. I honestly find actually the parts that are most moving is when people talk about God as a being that needs to be comforted because of like the creations that it made, because of humanity. Some of my favorite kind of like rabbinic and like Talmudic stories about Hashem are in terms of like, I don't know, when God comes down and then like starts laughing because he's like, oh, my children have defeated me, my children have defeated me. And I love the kind of tension between obedience and disobedience in Jewish tradition. So I did really enjoy this. I think, you know, there's some decisions that she made, like it's not supposed to be like super serious or anything like that. But I did think it was sweet. I really disliked at the very beginning where the world has not been created, and then like the first human, he sees the face of God as an old man, and that's not God's face. In this is God's face. She wears a little crown and she's just cute. It's pretty quick to read. There's like yeah, it is quite slight in terms of how much text there is on a page, and then also just like the pages themselves, they are like quite simple too. But that's not that's not a criticism. Like, I like a lot of different art styles, so this is fine. I think if all of the like graphic novels I was reading or whatever were like this, then I would not like it. And I actually think I might reread it at some point too. I'm so sorry if I've been doing this with a slightly foggy screen the whole time. The next book I read was Dyke Geology by Sabrina Imbler. And this is a really small non-fiction kind of essay about relationships, volcanoes, rocks, queerness. Yeah, it's really... I really enjoyed it, actually. I thought it was better written than I thought it would be, I guess. So I did like the writing style, and I liked... yeah, I just liked it. I enjoyed it. And I think if you're like interested in gayness and also you love rocks, like if you're a geology kind of person, then you should definitely check this out, like queer geologists, you know? I think actually I'm going to lend this to someone who loves like queer geology stuff. So the next book I read actually was another reread of another children's book, and that's Jolly Foul Play by Robin Stevens. I think it's maybe the fourth in the Murder Most Unladylike, or whatever it's called, series. I think like it's so funny that I haven't been rereading books that I read as a kid. I've been rereading kids' books that I read for the first time as an adult, as like a way to, you know, relax or like chill out or whatever. But you know, that's okay. Anyway, I also really wanted to reread this one because there's like a queer dimension to it, and it just had been like, I just been like hankering to. Also partially because I watched a Poirot episode, which I believe this was probably quite a lot inspired by, and it's set in a school, like in a boarding school, and there's obviously a murder, and it's like related to sports and stuff, and this is also similarly so to some degree. I finished reading this and it was like 8 a.m. and I hadn't slept and stuff, and I just like started crying about like the characters, and like this one character, and like obviously it's set in the 1930s, and it does talk a little bit about like the rise of Hitler and Nazism and stuff, and so I just like started crying about that, and also like the queer stuff I also started crying about. The queer stuff is not ultimately tragic. I'm saying that because I feel like it's good to know going in. I think that's that. Alright, now we get to the big book, which I probably will talk about for a while maybe, and that is The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing. Just a fantastic book. I've talked about this multiple times because it has obviously taken me a while to read. It is 570 or so pages, and I would say that like in comparison with other stuff, when it's 570 pages, like there's not very much space on a page, so each page does take like a while to read. I think we should just have like a moment of silence for how appalling the cover is. Just literally the worst, but like, you know, she can't help it. It's not her fault. Don't blame her. So The Golden Notebook is about a woman called Anna Wolf, who is a writer, and she is struggling. It's the 1950s. She basically keeps these notebooks, 4 notebooks, that she kind of compartmentalizes her life into. One is, or attempts to, one is red, and that's for like Communist Party stuff. One is black, which is related to, so she's a writer, I think I did say that, and she has published a book called Frontiers of War. So that the black book is all about stuff related to the book, like the contents of the book, the memories that made up the book, and then also it's a novel, but also just like writer life, like people asking for like the rights of her work to be turned into a film, or like commenting on like, yeah, meeting with like agents and stuff. A yellow notebook, which is like kind of a novel book, like at least a sort of fiction writing creative practice book. And then a blue book. It's also like, what's also weird is that they didn't even get the colours right if they were going to do this really weirdly like literal interpretation of the cover. Yes, and then the blue book is for psychoanalysis. So yeah, I just thought this book was like so smart and like just like so sophisticated, so interesting, so full of like so many different things, but not overwhelmed. I thought it was also so interesting in terms of how it's thinking about the novel and how it's playfulness with form. I think it works actually as a form of Marxist literary criticism, which I think is really interesting. I think it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's so like difficult sometimes and like sad, but it's so beautiful. And so it's written in 1962, or it was published then, and that's also incredible, to be honest. Like obviously, I mean, you know, the feminine mystique is not the be all and end all of like second wave feminism or feminism anyway, but that was published in 1963, right? So you can kind of get a sense of how like this was before a lot of the calcification and a lot of just like women's liberation in general. There's also a preface by Doris Lessing in 1971 where she talks about people's response to the book, where they do just label it kind of as like a sex war book or whatever, and she doesn't feel like that's fair, and I would agree with that. I mean, I do think it is about gender, and it is about not necessarily women's liberation, but about the gender dimensions of society and the difficulty of being a woman. I think it's just really fascinating. Honestly, I found it so fascinating to read. I think a lot of the experiences of Anna and also of Ella chime with today. A lot of the issues in terms of heterosexuality, in terms of like the weight put upon women to be the emotional centre of relationships, especially with men, and just like the care work that they do is all kind of still relevant. I mean, obviously things have changed, and I think especially in terms of like the position of marriage and like what marriage does maybe is different, especially because people get married less than they did anyway. But like Anna Wolf was married, she has a child, and then like she's divorced, so she's like a free woman. And basically the novel is split into Free Women 1, and then we also get the notebooks, which just tells us what's in the notebooks, and like goes through them. Yeah, the time is like a little bit all over the place, sort of, or like not totally, but like the notebooks, we obviously go through them. And then also, so what I loved about this was like how sometimes you won't know about something unless like a character comments on it. So like there's a point where somebody else reads Anna's notebooks and he says, why have you written it like this? Like, why do you write in different handwriting? Why did you put this in like brackets next to this, not in brackets? And we don't know that. We haven't seen the brackets. We also don't see the like differences in script. It just tells us sometimes that it's a different script. So yeah, that's also interesting. So yeah, it's Anna Wolf is having a breakdown. I think that's fairly clear. The breakdown is almost kind of like normal in the sense that it's like a normal aspect of society when like society puts all this pressure on you and the women around you and the men around you like behave in the same ways. But yeah, so it is about that. It's also about creativity. It's very much about like writing a novel, the difficulty of writing a novel. And it is super about psychoanalysis, and yeah, there's this character who's the psychoanalyst that Ella goes to at one point. Not all the time, she's not seeing somebody the whole time, but they nickname her Mother Sugar because her and her best friend Molly, they go to the same psychoanalyst, and she's called like Mrs. Marks, actually, I think, like not with an X but with RCKS, which I also think is very interesting. Because that's another thing that I find just like wonderful about this novel, is I feel like all of these things, like when you think deeper into them, they all are managing to circle back on themselves. Like that's what's so incredibly impressive about the form. It's like, I was thinking about, okay, so at the end I felt like, oh, this book has become almost like a play. Like they talk about the dialogue, they're like, oh, we don't have to say these lines again. And also film is generally like a thing that's part of this too. It's interested in the film as another form as well, and also as a different way to tell a story and perspective and whatever. But anyway, the point is, the play. So then I was thinking about, oh, it's like a play, and then I remembered that there's also this like stuff about plays, but also specifically about playing, about like Ella's child, sorry, not Ella, about Anna's child being like, mummy, play, come play, and Anna being like, oh, I couldn't, I felt like stuck in that moment, I couldn't come and play, like I couldn't go to my child and like play with her. So yeah, I don't know, like there was just all of this way that it feeds back on itself in this like incredible way. I don't know. I just think it's like fantastic, like just a fantastic piece of work. And so there's like explicitly political elements. What I really loved as well is in the preface, Doris Lessing talks about how like the Marxists or like the ex-Marxists were the ones who mostly got what she was doing, which I thought that was really sweet. And another time where like something like the play sort of theme happens is this idea of like joining the party, being part of the party, as in the Communist Party. And there's also a lot of discussion about like Ella didn't want to go to the party, as in like an actual party. When we read stuff from the Yellow Notebook, for example, we can very easily see like echoes and resonances with what happens to Anna in the Free Women section. Yeah, and there's all sorts of resonances as well in terms of like the earlier novel that Anna talks about. It's set in the 50s, and it does engage with Stalinist communism. It's very interesting as well in that sense, because there is also a kind of like need or desire to get to the truth, to get to authenticity, to like say the real thing, but it's also really hard to tell what is the real thing. And then it's, you know, it was really interesting to me in terms of like engaging in some way with communist history and whatever, to think about this kind of communist organising and like the British Communist Party and their responses to like Stalinist stuff. And like, so I guess this was, so Stalin's death was in like what, 54 or something, so it's set around that time, and then stuff came out about his behaviour and about what happened to people, and there's like also some stuff about like what was happening to Jews in the Soviet Union, and I obviously personally found that stuff really interesting because I'm just interested in communist history, like lowercase and uppercase communist history, you know. I loved how much this book was about gender, right? And I think it's about gender in ways that it doesn't even necessarily know it's about gender sometimes, so or maybe that's not fair to say, but just like there is like a bit that I think is kind of homophobic, or like Anna is certainly homophobic, and so that's an interesting kind of sort of thing to deal with. Obviously I'm not trying to defend homophobia but I do think that like in terms of within this, there is the sense that like because Anna's being homophobic, being uncomfortable, but then these like men are also being really misogynistic, and there's this kind of like disparity or like difficulty there because of these kinds of roadblocks, instead of having like a solidarity with each other in terms of their like different but also overlapping experience of gender. I also do think that like Molly and Anna are gay in this, but they're not allowed to be gay, and I think that's a real shame. And there's even like a bit that kind of like specifically says to that. There's actually multiple comments that men especially make about like Molly and Anna's friendship being like lesbian, but there's also a bit where Anna almost comes to realise that about herself, but then she doesn't, because apparently it's actually about something else, which I didn't find convincing. Obviously, because I'm me. Anyway, I feel like I just talked about this book forever. It's so good. Please do talk to me about this if you've read it. Oh, it's just so good. It does also talk about blindness and disability to some degree, and I don't think it's done in a way that completely like metaphorizes the blindness into like not a real material experience, but I also think it is part of the narrative, and it's like in terms of like a literary kind of metaphorical sense to some degree, or not metaphorical, but like for example, like the person who's blinded, he reads Anna's notebooks, he reads all 4 of them, and then he's blinded later on, so that obviously is like pretty redolent with metaphorical meaning, with this idea of like uncontainable life blinding you, and the chaos of trying to put it all together, or reading it all together, or whatever. It does engage with like African independence to some degree, and then it also like the novel that Anna Wolf writes, and also I know that like Doris Lessing grew up in Rhodesia, like a place in South Africa. I don't actually know that much about her life though, but like I know that part, and obviously it is a bit difficult because Doris Lessing is writing this book. She's a woman writer. Anna Wolf is writing has written a book and is also writing a book, or trying to write a book in this, and she's obviously a woman and a writer. And then Ella, which is the woman that she's writing about, like Anna Wolf is writing about in her Yellow Notebook, she is a woman writer in the novel. So it's like novels on novels on novels, women writers on women writers, so it is a bit hard to keep track of like what happened to who and who said what, and then especially because like people's names are used multiple times. Like there's a love interest called Paul, and there's a love interest called Paul for Ella as well. There's also a love interest for Anna, who she then takes the name of, and she explicitly says she's doing this, and she gives the name to her child, to the child of Ella in the Yellow Notebook. Obviously we know that that is like a like a sort of statement on heterosexual relations to some degree at least. But now I can't remember. I did read the very beginnings of this, which is the bit that most talks about Frontiers of War and that novel, like in depth in terms of like where it was and stuff. I read it the furthest away now, because I think I started reading this in December. Like it did take me a while to read, but obviously part of that was because I stopped in February because I wanted to be able to focus on it, and I really couldn't then. Anyway, so I think I'm gonna stop myself there. We're about to reach 40 minutes and I still have a book and kind of half a book to talk about. But yeah, please do talk to me about this if you've read it, and also let me know what books you think I should read next from Doris Lessing. Like I have no idea what to read next from her, but obviously I will have to read something from her. And then the final book I finished was a Natalia Ginzburg book, and that's Voices in the Evening. This one is from the 60s, I think 1961, translated by, Oh, did I say who was this? Oh, I didn't say who Valentino was translated by. Sorry, it's translated by Avril Bardoni. And then Voices in the Evening was translated by DM Lowe. This book is, I basically read it all over Shabbat, like the most recent one, so that was nice. So this book is about, it's set post-World War, but it's also very much about what happened, the aftermath. It's about, yeah, like post-fascist Italy. It's I mean, all of that sounds very like political and like blah blah blah, but it's very much about like interpersonal relationships. It's mainly focused on one family called the De Franceschi. Yeah, it's not just about them, it's about, you know, the place that they live. And it's also done kind of through like a love story to some degree, but it's very sort of, I almost want to say shy about that. Like Natalia Ginzburg has a really amazing, like vivid simplicity. She's almost crude in her writing, but like not in a derogatory way. It's like, it's just very clear and very good, you know. I don't know, it's just like not a very interesting way to describe something, but, and I really felt this shine with this. And I also actually felt with this other book of hers that I'm reading, The Little Virtues, which I'll talk a little bit about after. But I did start reading The Little Virtues before I got to this, and I actually really enjoyed it so much that it made me also be like, oh, okay, I will read this. We're sort of getting two stories, but they're the same story, because we're getting this kind of love story, or like this potential love story between this woman called Elsa, who's narrating the story. She's 27 years old. Her mother is like a hypochondriac, partially about the fact that she isn't married, and her relationship to this man called Tomasino. Then we also get the story of the De Franceschi family. I'm so sorry, I probably am butchering that. And this man called Old Bellotta and all of his kids. And we get kind of like an in-depth look at their lives, and like both in terms of like how their lives were shaped by fascism and the Second World War, and also after that as well, the aftermath. I think this is really an interesting testament to how fascism ruins things, even if you weren't a fascist. I liked that it kind of takes this political context and framework, and it makes it into an interpersonal story. The refrain, like, why is everything so ruined, or something like that, is repeated by at least two people. And it's said in the context of like romantic relationships, but I think it's very sort of easy to see how that can be like refracted out to mean more than just romantic relationships. Or like, one of the reasons why romantic relationships are ruined is because of the fraught nature of relationships at all under like a dictatorship, under fascism, under like extremely intense political division. Like, I just also obviously am very interested in Natalia Ginzburg as like an anti-fascist author, and like thinking about her work in that sense, and like in the context of anti-fascist thought and also action. But I don't think she's necessarily like that serious about it, but in a way that feels actually very like sort of accurate to how it must have been like to live through like these moments of, well, I guess we all kind of know about how it maybe feels to live through moments of like political insurgency, or like political extremism, and like more and more. And yeah, anyway, that's a very intense thought, I guess. But you know, maybe in that way as well, they're very like, it's almost like comforting to read these, because they're like sort of, they're not post-apocalyptic obviously, but they almost could be in that sense. Like, they are post a lot of awful stuff, and then they also do contain this level of like grief, this level of like, but also this level of continuity of people just, they do continue to live their lives, you know. And obviously people don't too, because a lot of people have died or whatever, were murdered. I'm doing a really bad job talking about this, but I did really enjoy this. This was one of my favourites so far, definitely. And it was my favourite so far of her novels / fiction. Yeah, okay, so then I'm reading The Little Virtues, which is this collection of essays. It's separated into 2 parts, and I've almost finished part 1, and I'm really enjoying it. I actually read out loud Winter in the Abruzzi to Mari, and I